Welcome back. Welcome back to day 4, everybody. It's a special day for Penny and for me because we are with our good friend, fellow educator, and our editor of our new book, Tom Newkirk. But we're not here to talk about our new book. We're here to talk about Tom's new book. And I want to just say that anytime a Newkirk book comes out, Tom, did it literally come out today or yesterday?
I'm not sure. In the last few days, yeah.
So I start going through, my collection. One of my favorites is Holding On to Good Ideas in Times of Others. You can see the amount of Post-it notes that are flopping out of that book. And I don't know, even this one you wrote years ago, the School Essay Manifesto, I loved. And Penny and I were talking the other day in thinking about this conversation, and we were thinking about, we asked each other, well, what's your favorite Newkirk book? And it turned into like a 10-minute conversation where we actually never identified a single one as our favorite book. But I really, really loved Minds Made for Stories. I really loved Embarrassment. So to be able to talk with you today, Tom, is a real thrill for me. Morning, Penny.
Yeah, I was thinking when you were talking, Kelly, isn't it kind of like a box of chocolates? Like, it's every one of them. They're these, like the performance of self in student writing, wasn't that a Russell winner from NCTE? I remember reading that and just feeling like I gobbled it up, but it was this package that just I had to go back to. And I've done that with The Art of Slow Reading and definitely Holding On to Good Ideas in a Time of Bad Ones. I think I've read it 2 or 3 times at least. And what I love about your work is the combination of your own curiosity and your scholarship. So you deeply research whatever it is you're after, but you're always curious. And I felt like that was the heart of Writing Unbound, which is the study of fiction in middle and high school, your new book. And it's all based on interviews with young writers and their teachers. And I found it just like so compelling for me, because if there's one thing that gets more disrespect than narrative in middle and high schools, it's fiction. And so I knew that you had this curiosity, and I want you to start with that. What is it about fiction that drove you to really want to think deeply about it?
Well, partly it's why it's so excluded from high school. I mean, it was the combination of like, we see fiction reading as absolutely the center, I would say, of English language arts, and for good reason. I mean, it takes you into different personalities, into different times. There's a good reason why we have fiction reading as the center, as such an important part of English. But then the writing of fiction is virtually abandoned if it's existing at all in middle school. Maybe it exists in elementary school, but what's the logic to have the reading of fiction as central and the writing of fiction as almost not allowed or banished to the private writing of the students? So that's one thing, that paradox. And the other thing is that I've never been a fiction writer. I mean, in a way, the person who wrote this book should be a fiction writer or an advocate of fan fiction, somebody who's delved into that. But I've done none of that. And so I was curious about these people who did do it, the kids who wrote novels. What's it like? So it was almost like, I'm the novice. I'm not the expert. They're the expert. And I wrote the book like they're the experts. They're going to teach us how to do it.
So that's such an interesting paradox, Tom. But maybe you could go a little further and talk about like, what is the value that kids are missing out on when they aren't given time to write fiction in middle and high school?
Well, I think that it doesn't allow them to enter the psychology of other people. And I think that's one of the things that in reading, we enter into different personalities, and we almost expand our sense of the possibility of human psychology. And so I think if they're just required to write personal memoirs, which I think is a great thing to write, they're not really probing these alternate other personalities. I think that's one thing. And the other thing is just the volume just the extensiveness of the writing that these kids are trying. Like one time I was at this supermarket, and I had my English, UNH English department t-shirt on, and this girl who's kind of filling up the bags said to me, I'm on my third novel. I didn't have time to talk to her, but I said, you're on your third novel. So there's all this stuff going on, these people writing at great length with great passion, and it just doesn't figure into English as we're pretty much have defined it in high school. So I just think that power that these kids, like if you have these eighth graders who write 40,000 words in November, like I'm in awe of these kids, so I'm kind of like almost like nervous talking to these kids because they've done something I've never done. And if you can write 40,000 words in November, a 5-page paper in college is not going to faze you. You have a certain fluency and power that you're going to bring to that. And I think that what happens with these kids who write at great length, they just have a sense that they can tackle anything, and I think that kind of confidence is something we miss out on if they don't have a chance to do it.
That's really amazing. I love the observation that they can do anything because of their sense of having a hold of it all, right? If I can envision a novel, then I can certainly envision my way through the moves of a 5,000 word piece in college. People aren't making that connection because they're thinking research is so different from fiction. And many of the longer pieces you write in college have something to do with a research question or a gathering of evidence. So could you talk about how you see those as more similar than different?
Yeah, I think we tend to like just see these genres. The idea of genre is a good idea. Okay, I'll start with that. But genres are not airtight, because a lot of skills transfer from one genre to the other. And I think in fiction writing, often you have like conflict. You have two different points of view that are kind of going at each other. And in argument, you have two different points of view going at each other, right? And so to enter a kind of dialectic or debate, I think that's part of fiction. I also think part of fiction is reflection. Fiction is about trouble. Somebody's in trouble, right?
Mm-hmm.
Without trouble, there's no fiction. And when you're in trouble, what do you have to do? You say, okay, how did I get into this? How am I going to get out of this? What's happening to me? It's not just action. It's not just chronology. It's like reflection where you have to think about, what do I do? Why did this happen to me? And that's analytic, right? That's analysis. I'm self-reflection. And I think that's a skill that goes into essay writing, that goes into argumentative writing. So I think that there's a lot of skills that cross over, other than just the sense of fluency. That's just that sense of power, and that you can write at great length. So those would be a couple things that cross over. But I think it's a mistake to think that if you're writing in one genre, you're gaining nothing that will help you in another genre. That's a way too restrictive view of genre, I think.
Well said.
I mean, even at the micro level, right? I mean, even certain writing moves and techniques, right? If you have strong voice in a narrative, you could have strong voice in an argument, which I think is one of the reasons in 180 Days, Penny and I began the year with narrative. I mean, there were a lot of reasons for that. One was, of course, kids have stories only they can tell, but that all, the things that you learn in writing a really good narrative translate across all the other kinds of writing we're going to do across the year.
Absolutely. And I think if you want to become good at argument or persuasion, you have to be able to ground your argument in something concrete, something specific. Otherwise it just becomes an abstraction. So like skills of storytelling, telling a short anecdote to begin an argument, to kind of situate it in human reality, hugely important.
Yeah, that reminds me of your work in Minds Made for Stories, when you talk about, like, even in exposition, even in science writing, right, that the really best science writing is somehow grounded in some sort of a deep narrative structure.
Absolutely.
Right, that when we're taught science or history through story, it's easier to consume.
like I remember for me, it was Microbe Hunters, reading Microbe Hunters, Paul de Croof, I may be mispronouncing his name, but just like Pasteur and those people that discovered, the germ theory, that was really exciting to me. And I even think that if you're writing, like a research article, some, the most seemingly impersonal kinds of writing, it works if you have a narrative arc. There's some problem, like everything starts with some kind of trouble, okay? Everything, and research writing has a plot. There's some trouble. There's something that's unsolved, something that for which your normal explanations don't work. And then you have to kind of resolve that. Okay, so there's like a problem and a sense of resolution. And I think that good research writing maintains that sense of, narrative plot, and I think that's why setting up a research article is really important, because it creates a sense of expectation. There's something that needs to be discovered here, and I'm going to take you on a journey to do it. So it may not look like a typical narrative, it won't look like a short story, but I think it is a narrative.
That's such an enormous distinction for people to make, from narrative being a genre to being a way that we think, which was the heart of Minds Made for Stories. But I was thinking as you were talking that I can count over my 21 years as a high school English teacher, 8 different department chairs. I may be leaving one out. Only one of the 8 ever had any respect for fiction. I distinctly remember I was writing right beside them. You wrote the foreword, and I had asked my students to write a scene, and one of my students, a 10th grade boy, said, "Does it have to be true?" And I said, "Well, no, because it's the same skills. Whether you're writing fiction or memoir, you're using the same skills, so it doesn't matter to me." And he sat down and wrote for the rest of the period, didn't want to get up when the bell rang. And what he wrote was a scene on a battlefield. He had just left history. He was fascinated by this war, and he created a scene, created his characters. It was stunning. I took it to my department meeting. I was roundly dismissed. You're just letting kids make stuff up. How is that? It was just so humiliating. Like, I didn't have the language that you have to defend myself. I simply felt that I was not rigorous. That's always the place people stand is, oh, well, you're just letting them make it up. That's not hard. And, of course, had not written fiction themselves, but what is it besides this terrific book that you think can help us make inroads with leaders and other teachers about this, what you discovered in your research that is so critically important for the engagement and success of kids in writing?
One thing I would think is that unless teachers have the chance to try to write fiction themselves and are in a kind of welcoming, encouraging place where they can take that first step to write fiction, they're going to have trouble teaching fiction. I mean, this is like our classic truth that we've, been spouting forever, really, that teachers of writing need to be writers. That when you do writing yourself, you understand it in a way that you can't understand it if somebody's just telling you how to teach writing. You have to have that kind of almost embodied knowledge of writing. And I think increasingly teachers are getting that through writing projects, through the work that you and Kelly are doing, chances to write. But I think they need a chance to write fiction. Otherwise they're going to like steer clear of it. Because they don't have that instinct that they get from actual writing. And so, I mean, this is like kind of maybe a bigger change, but I think in teacher training, typically teachers have to take a beginning writing course like everybody else, right? Which is almost exclusively nonfiction. And then maybe a later course in teaching writing, but where they might have a few options to write, but they really have no options really to learn how to write fiction, even if they want to, right? They have to kind of claw their way into a creative writing class, which is pretty difficult. So I think that to have opportunities for teachers to write it and to have like short, almost like pre-fictional things where you're just maybe writing a sketch or writing dialogue, or, it doesn't have to be a big deal, but so you begin to get a feel for what it's like to, to create a character that's not just you. So I think that's one thing that needs to happen, is that we need to expand the opportunities for teachers to write in these forums. Otherwise, I think they're going to be reluctant to try them. So, that's one thing I'd suggest.
Oh, and what you suggested came with a whole array of things like
Mm,
practice dialogue, a fictional dialogue, which we did in 180 days with our students, and
mm.
practice a sketch. And there are ways in. And I
Yep.
think, you didn't mention, but you certainly saw, and I read in the interviews in your new book, that these kids are so engaged in they're going to write well past any kinds of barriers we might put up, like, ooh, spend 20 minutes on this tonight. They're going to write well. Did you find that when you were listening to them?
Oh, I think they just couldn't wait to get to their fiction writing. I think it was just they would dream about it. They would get up. They talked about getting up at night with a solution to a problem in their fiction writing. And these are not necessarily the average students, and these are self-nominated fiction writers. But I think they dreamed it. Like one of the boys I talked to, he would like just walk around his room and gesture, like do the voices of his characters, and he'd just go around until he'd drive his parents crazy, and then finally say, Ernest, you go write it. or sometimes what he would do is he would tell the plot, and the plot would get so complicated, and finally I think his parents just said, Ernest, go write it. You gotta write it. I can't take it anymore, So I think that, and I think that if you just go into a classroom of, say, 7th graders or 8th graders and say, what would you rather do, write fiction or nonfiction? They would love the chance to write fiction, maybe not all of them. And really what I'm asking, I'm not saying everybody should do this, or this should be a requirement for everybody, but I'm saying, can't we open the door some? Can't we let, maybe like the Tom Newkirk method for getting kids to love fiction would be just one story a year, Let them write one story every year, And they don't even require it, but just let them write one story every year. And I think they will remember those stories more than a lot of the other stuff that we ask them to do. So that's my no frills, no cost method for getting kids to become more engaged in writing. So you can
So
take
I'm
it to the
wondering,
bank. I'm not going to trademark this. You got it. It's yours if you want it.
I'm wondering if the opposite might be true for some kids, Tom, in the sense that the door has been closed so long
Yeah.
for this kind of thinking that by the time they become, a senior in high school, they haven't even thought about writing fiction for so long that it's so distant from them
Mhm.
that they may be reluctant. And I think that's, of course, where the modeling really comes in
Yeah.
and comes into play. And you talked about the benefits of you kind of hinted at, building empathy and analysis, but I'm wondering like where the creativity thing is, because Penny, and she could speak to this, she's sitting right here, but she's found that a lot of kids in college, when they find it's not a formulaic piece of writing that the professor's asking for, they're really flummoxed
Mhm.
on what to do. And I'm just wondering about that sort of that gene, that creative gene is kind of shrunk in so many kids,
Mhm. Mhm. And maybe the answer, I mean, not to be glib, but maybe the answer is to start small, and like to start with some, like Nancy Atwell has a lot of good ideas for flash fiction, small fiction, to get your toe in the water to start with it. So maybe it's things like that. But I agree that the longer you play the game, and the game is kind of a impersonal formulaic writing, and then you try to change the rules of the game to make it more interesting, sometimes there can be resistance to that because the game has worked for a lot of kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like the creativity thing is really a concern for me. Like that, like kids have not giving the opportunities to be creative in school.
Mm-hmm. 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 I
Very,
think,
very true. And
yeah,
teachers not being given that opportunity.
and I think there's
My guess is if that door was cracked a little bit, the kids would then push the door open and go.
Yep. And I think maybe if the teacher takes that first step himself or herself and puts it out there and say, okay, this is what I tried. And, I think that helps open the door. I think finding models that kids really like, that, find things and to try some things like that they really love to read, that might crack the door open a little bit more. And not every kid's going to walk through the door, but I think that a lot of them will. And I think that in doing that, one of the things that you're learning by writing fiction is you're learning the craft of fiction writing to make you a better reader, so that you begin to have a writer's sense of what reading is all about, and so that you begin to notice things. And so some of the teachers talked about even if your goal is critical analysis, writing fiction helps you understand kind of what it takes to create an effect in a reader. How dialogue works, or how reflection works, or just the craft. And so I think that it has benefits for the reading too. But I think there's this, whether it's extinguished or not, or whether it's suppressed, but I think there's this desire to be creative, and the sense that to be successful in the world, you have to be creative. That even if you look at TV commercials, what they can do in 30 seconds. The some of the Geico commercials where you have the tag team, hip hop, in just in 30 seconds, you have this really funny story. Well, somebody figured that out, And so I think kids know that that's the world. It's imagination and creativity are part of that, and not just following a formula.
Oh, that is a superb way to end an interview. But I wanted I have 3 lightning round questions for you. I don't know which ones Kelly came up with, how many we have total, but we're ending our interviews with questions that might give us a little more insight into you.
Okay.
And the first one I want to ask you is, years ago, I took your class at UNH, which is coming up. The Summer Literacy Institute program is coming up this, wow, I think mid-June. But you introduced me to Steve Colbert. I took Boys in Literacy. I'd never heard of him. And you used humor so much in your teaching. You had these clips of YouTube, all kinds of things. So what I want to know is, what has made you laugh in the last year? A book, a TV show, something that I'm going to add to my watch list.
I think A Man Called Ove, the book. I thought that was really funny.
That's awesome.
Yeah. God, last year was not a great laughing year. I didn't think.
I know.
Yeah. I think watching my dog. I think my dog. She made me laugh. She still makes me laugh. So there's a couple things.
Tom, you and I share a love for baseball. What's your most memorable moment in Fenway Park?
I think the first time I went there, maybe 1967, and Reggie Smith was the center fielder, and I was in the bleachers, and the game ended with a fly ball to Reggie Smith, and then he threw the guy out at home plate, and I thought, this is good. And I've been back there many times since then. So
that's awesome.
Yeah,
that is awesome. So you edited this book that we have just finished, Kelly and I. Okay, so tell me an observation you made of us as writing partners in the process.
That's all the time we have. That's all the time we have today, folks. Thanks for coming.
It could be really tough for us.
I think you're a little bit more on the romantic side, and Kelly is a little bit on the kind of hard edge side. And I think you're kind of balance each other out in a good way. So that's what I thought. Now I don't know if that's true or not, because I couldn't tell which was which, but
we both laughed because I think we'd pretty much agree that's true.
Yeah.
So Kelly, do you have another one?
My last one. Tom, tell us about your first car.
Nice.
My first car was a Volkswagen, 1960 Volkswagen, that my parents got into a Volkswagen craze. And so it was so cool to have a Volkswagen. It was one that didn't even have a gas gauge, because the original Volkswagen didn't have a gas gauge. And so what would happen is you'd run out of gas, or you'd seem to run out of gas, your car would sputter. And then you had this little knob at the baseboard, and you'd have to turn that with your right foot, and that, you know, you turned it 90 degrees, and that would give you an extra gallon of gas. And it was such a traumatic thing that you never ran out of gas, because you think, I got to get.
That's great.
Yeah.
That is an awesome story to end on. So Heinemann's website, they have Writing Unbound. What's the subtitle again?
Oh, how fiction transforms student writers.
Nice.
How fiction transforms student writers. Yeah, we worked on that a while.
It will be linked on our Padlet. I just highly recommend this book. What a terrific addition to the collection of Newkirk titles.
Well, thank you very much.
I concur. I think Tom Newkirk is the Emerson of contemporary American education. And so to have this conversation and this friendship with you over the years, Tom, is really, really a treat for us. And so thank you so much for coming out and hanging out with us today. You guys need to read his new book. It's great.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. Great talking to you.
Tom.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
See y'all
Bye.
tomorrow.
Bye.